move to motion 3 before the break. So those who are speaking on motion 3, can you please make your way to the front? 2 people submitted speaker slips for motion 3 after the 10:10 deadline. You will not be called to speak. Please do make sure you check the deadlines for submitting your speaker slips. As a reminder as well, the FTA motion is going to be an open mic, so outside of a proposer, everyone will have the right to speak. You do not need to submit speaker slips for the FTA day. Thank you. Right. The proposer for motion 3 is Dr. Saidati from East of England. First-time speaker.
So here's a problem no doctor in this country can escape: specialty training. As if 5 or 6 years in med school and 2 years at a soul-crushing foundation program are not bad enough, they then make us fight each other for a place on the specialty training program. An arbitrary checklist, irrelevant exams, and pointless interviews are almost randomizers to select a small number of doctors from a huge pool of talented, experienced, and hard-working individuals. Those who are rejected are plunged into medical purgatory, and the general population are left with a growing number of shortage of specialty doctors. The problems only begin for those who are accepted onto the program. Regular rotations leave them living the life of Ash Ketchum from Pokemon, who has to travel from town to town for the next gym badge. None of these doctors are a 10-year-old child, though, who can live out of a backpack and receives complimentary benefits and services where he travels. Instead, they are adults with lives, partners, children. Regular rotation leaves them with no choice but to face either unreasonable and unsafe commutes or stuck in short-term renting. Both have extortionate costs from a shrinking income. This compromises well-being, strains relationships, and reduces morale. With only a few weeks' notice, a doctor can be expected to pack up and leave and be exiled across a region, as if nothing in their life outside of medicine matters. For those who decide not to pack up and leave and drive instead, well, they can face prison if they fall asleep behind the wheel after a difficult night shift. And those who can't drive due to disabilities or any other reason can face hours of commute and forget about sleep altogether. And if going through this application process once isn't bad enough, some specialties make you go through it twice. For what reason? Those who are rejected for their SD4 applications are plunged back into medical purgatory. Now, a few years down the line, they're more likely to have families, and they can be ending up in any part of the country now if they want to progress their career. NHS England doesn't care. But should you put up with all of these uncertainties and inconveniences, you should at least expect high-quality training, right? No. Training is poor, study leave is difficult to book, and we almost have to duel each other for learning opportunities.
I'm sorry, it's the last sentence now.
Thank you.
I will now call Dr. Gredetten against from Northern.
Really don't like the binary for and against, but as a defence trainee, I'm acutely aware of the burden that rotational training causes, with only having 5 training locations in the entire country to choose from and having been sent around the country and abroad, often at short notice and sometimes for extended periods of time. But despite this, I do have questions on 2 principles. They support the overarching motion and its intention. Firstly, any call for changes to training numbers needs to be evaluated for its consequences, intended or otherwise. This includes looking at the effect of training opportunities, career progression, including consultant posts and capacity. Whilst headline numerical terms, increasing numbers, would seem to offset the reported doctor shortage, it can be more nuanced than that. Whilst perhaps too complex in the 2 minutes I have here, the Radio 4 More or Less podcast released on the 8th of February provide some insight into how NHS vacancy rates are calculated and the limitations of these. In essence, published vacancies aren't necessarily always the same as shortages. And whilst it is critically important that trainee numbers reflect the requirement of the NHS, we should be wary about the impact that wholesale increase could lead to. My second point is to play devil's advocate on rotational training. Whilst there are logistical downsides, these can be offset by the exposure to a wide variety of settings, people, patients, and practices that contribute to driving good and diverse clinical practice for the profession. Moreover, it allows equitable access to the different training opportunities and trainers available in a particular region. There is a balance to be struck in terms of geographical spread and excess movement, but there can be limitations of this outside of dense urban areas. I believe there should be a focus on improving the quality of transition, especially with improving the HE travel expenses framework and better accommodation provision for doctors. Freedom and flexibility need to be balanced with the access to quality medical training for all trainees, and that can only be achieved with some degree of movement. Stagnating these can risk compromising the quality of our training. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will now go to Dr. Chadwick online, who is speaking for the motion and is a first-time speaker.
Morning, I'm Dr. Chadwick. I'm from Northwest JDC. I'd like to speak in favour of this motion because I think that this motion helps the BMA lobby to improve the daily lives of doctors, and there's lots of real-life personal stories that I've heard from my colleagues that would be greatly impacted if this motion's recommendations were implemented. I'd like to sort of divide my arguments into two categories. So this would improve the working lives of junior doctors who are often exposed to 4 or 6 month rotations where they cannot form strong bonds with the team. They cannot, both medical teams with their consultant and SAS colleagues, and also with the allied health professionals that they work with day in, day out. This prevents doctors from taking up leadership opportunities and from meeting their portfolio requirements in audit, and also even attending clinic and getting adequate training opportunities. On the personal side, colleagues have described their impact on their relationships with their partners, with their families, from having to commute 1.5 hours within my region, from South Manchester all the way up to potentially Lancaster. This has led to a huge strain on people's relationships and marriages, which I think this motion would go some way towards addressing. So I'm in favour of this motion because it affects junior doctor retention, burnout, and quality of life for all our colleagues.
Thank you very much. We have 3 more speakers for. Within that, we have 2 first-time speakers and another whose motion is in the bracket. We have had several calls for parts, and as such, in order to maintain the timings and hopefully reach some in part 2, I will not be calling any further speakers for. We will go to a right of reply. We've also had a call for reference, so I'd like you to consider whether you want to take this motion as a reference or have it voted on in full. Thank you. Yep.
So just to reply to the points. So I think the onus of creating good training opportunities is with NHS England. Dividing deaneries into sub-regions isn't necessarily going to help when some regions are so big that you'll still end up with over an hour of commute each way. Providing accommodation will help some people, but it still won't let you see your children after work every night if you're on 4 long days a week. And I think there can be a balance struck between, people who want to rotate for that extra experience and those who do not want to. We don't necessarily have to impose no rotations on doctors who do want to rotate. That's it. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Sorry, Dr. Sadati. We've had a call for reference. If you were to take it as a reference, it would not become JDC policy if passed. It would merely guide JDC in how it acts. So your choice is between having it vote as a substantive motion, where if it passes it becomes policy, or as a reference, in which case it does not become policy. What would you prefer? Substantive, thank you. We will now take this motion in parts. There are 10 parts, so we will be going 1, 2, and downwards. We will be trying to fill the awkward silence with some animal facts. So, I will now ask for you to vote on part 1. As a reminder, 1 for those in the room is yes, 2 is no, 3 is abstain. You have to click OK, and if it says received, you have voted. Those online, you will see the vote in front of you. Okay, we have now started the vote. A rabbit's teeth never stop growing. They're gradually worn down as they chew on grasses, wildflowers, and vegetables. But unlike common knowledge, carrots are not the favorite food of rabbits. Lovely. I don't have all the facts. Do we have the result? Part 1 passes. We will now move to part 2. Okay, and we can open the vote for part 2. Female ferrets die if they do not mate once they go into heat. If mating does not occur, the female will succumb to aplastic anemia and die a most painful death. My apologies, we've been asked for clarification. Female ferrets die if they do not mate once they go into heat. If mating does not occur, the female will succumb to aplastic anemia and die a most painful death. If you have any questions further, you can submit it to the chat function. Do we have the results for part 2? Part 2 has passed. We will now start the vote for part 3. Nearly 3% of the ice in the Antarctic glaciers is penguin urine. And do we have the results for part 3? Part 3 passes. We will now go on to the vote for part 4. Dr. Harani Wooden, a member of CAC, has 4 rabbits, a white Netherland dwarf, a ginger and white linehead, and a grey Angora rabbit. I do not have all the facts.
There's a fourth one.
Oh, I'm sorry, there's a 4th one. A ginger and white linehead is in fact 1 rabbit. There is also a black mini linehead lop. Can we have the results for part 4? And online, if you are not seeing the results, please do refresh. Or if you're not seeing the votes, please do refresh. Part 4 passes. We'll move on to part 5. Frogs cannot vomit. If one absolutely has to, then it will vomit its entire stomach. Please note I did not write these animal facts, I am merely reading them. And can we see the results for part 5? Part 5 passes. We will move on to part 6. The vote is opened. Crocodiles cannot stick out their tongues. That fact is brought to you by the survivors. And we'll just wait for the results of part 6. Part 6 is passed. We'll now move on to part 7. Opening the vote for part 7. Thank you. Apparently, a snail can sleep for 3 years. I have no idea how they verified that fact. Please submit all questions via the mod platform. Can we now see the results for part 7? Part 7 passes. We move on to part 8. Part 8 voting has opened. A flamingo's head has to be upside down when it eats. Voting is finished. Can we now see the results for part 8? Fantastic. We'll now move on to part 9. Part 9's vote has opened. A bat is the only mammal that can fly voluntarily. I have been asked for clarification about bats being able to fly. Humans can also fly using machines, We would not suggest you try to fly without one. Unfortunately, as the motion is closed, we cannot accept points of information at this time. Part 9 has closed. Can we see the results of that vote? Part 9 has passed. We will now move on to the final part, Part 10. Voting has opened. A cockroach's brain is in its body, so once decapitated, a cockroach will keep on ticking, walking around, going about its business, eventually dying from starvation as it no longer has a mouth to eat with. We've all been there. The voting for Part 10 is closed. We will now see the result. Part 10 is passed. Motion 3 is passed in its entirety.